Hello! Welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega and wsdtime, and we're going to be talking about God today, apparently, because I'm atheist, Will's agnostic, and George is pantheist, and so George is going to talk to us a little bit about his conception of God and some of that. I'll turn it over to George and he can tell us what he thinks about how God is defined.
Okay, thanks, Chandler. Now, what I want to talk about specifically is how the atheist argument against God is very similar to the compatibilist argument defending free will. And I say that, in other words, like what compatibilists will do, they'll define free will in a certain way. Like they'll say, well, free will is just like doing what we want, and they'll say that that we have that free will. But Chandler, you and I know, and Will knows, that free will doesn't mean that. So in other words, like, so compatibilists are actually, defending a notion of free will that is incorrect. And so, like, my case in this podcast will be to present, an argument that atheists are actually, you know refuting a God that isn't the ordinary definition of God. Okay, so let's start like so, and we're on the wiki page on God, right? Because we're going to use wiki as our source. So let's start with God defined as being omnipresent or present everywhere. How does how does that sound to you, Will? How does that sound to you?
God being everywhere,
Right. Is God
even even in your bathroom while you're taking a shower.
exactly God?
Yeah,
Do
that
you
isn't
believe
creepy
that?
at all.
Huh? Does that make sense? Does the God that is everywhere does that make sense? Well, or Chandler, what's your take when I say that God is everywhere? Is like is there an argument against that?
Well, this is very interesting, George, because I understand that this is listed here as one of the attributes of God. And you know what's strange about it, George, is that nobody ever seemed to talk about that in the churches I grew up in.
And I agree with you completely. In other words, like
Nobody.
I'm not making a case for conventional religion because conventional religion has so many things wrong. It's just like it needs to be basically just torn down and just rebuilt from the ground up. I mean, we need a new basis for religion. My only
Some people
argument
would say
here
get rid of it
relates
altogether.
to the accurate definition of God. So like so Chandler, um, when I say that God, you know, is everywhere, that's the definition of God. Is there a way that I mean, do you believe that's a true statement? Do you believe a God like that exists, or would you say that that's inaccurate?
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing because all I can really say about it is it sure does not match the concept of God that I was taught as a child.
All right, again, and but like basically, I agree with you. You know what they teach. For example, in in churches, synagogues, they will teach that God is all powerful. Yet they'll also teach that we have free will. Again, like I'm agreeing with you.
Hmm.
There's a lot of nonsense that's taught in church, but again, like what biblical scholars know, what what when you, for example, if you would ask a priest or a minister in pretty much any church, if you ask them directly, and if you ask them like, is God omnipresent? I would doubt very few would say no. I think that's because again, the article is just basically encapsulating the major fundamental attributes of God.
Yeah, this is interesting because, like, okay, let's say that we go with this. Let's say that that God is everywhere. Well, then the only way for God to be everywhere is to literally be everything.
Exactly, and that's my point. So, in other words,
Hmm.
like, if God is everywhere, God is everything, and that's so. In other words, like, what's another term
That
for
means,
everything? The universe.
yeah.
You know,
That means
if
he's everything. That means he's somehow this controller that's sitting in front of me, this thermos, this TV, my cousin right here, that fan, those
it,
fans over there, that antenna, that fan above me.
exactly, Will, if God is everything and everywhere, then God is the universe. And so, like, so basically, to refute God, to say that God doesn't exist, would be, in a certain sense, to say that the universe doesn't exist.
Right. I see how that is in pantheism. Of course, when atheists say that God doesn't exist, none of them is actually saying that.
Well, that's what I'm saying, Chandler. I'm saying that like the atheist refutation of God is very similar to the compatibilist defense of free will. In other words, atheists are essentially refuting inaccurate, mistaken conceptions of God. So, like, basically, that's why we went to this wiki page on God. We're just going to analyze and explore the fundamental attributes of God, not the nonsense that's added to it, just like what God essentially means. So, all right, so like, so we basically kind of like understand that, like, if we define God as being everything and everywhere, then the universe is everything and everywhere. So then, so you can't really refute that God defined as everywhere, seems to be unequivocal. One can't argue against that. All right, the next, another fundamental attribute of God is that God is omnipotent. So Chandler, describe what omnipotence means.
Well, it's interesting because omnipotence, to me, when I was taught that God was omnipotent, it meant God could do anything.
Yep,
Right,
pretty much
right,
anything.
but I mean, I think like, I mean,
Which that
can
opens up
God,
a
for
lot of plot
example,
holes in the Bible, but yeah.
right, but and Chandler, I think that would be a kind of like a mistaken view of omnipotent. In other words, like, can God make 1 + 1 = 3? Right,
Oh no, here's another one. They say if God can do anything, can He make a boulder so heavy that even He can't lift it? They
exactly. All
hate
right.
that. They hate that question.
It's all right. So let's define omnipotence correctly as, the ability to do what can be done. If anything is done, then it's like, you know God is the power behind it. God is like, again, another definition of omnipotence is like that it is like powerful. It's unlimited power. It is like power over everything.
Yep.
So now, if we define God in that way, let's see if there's a natural explanation that correlates to that. And if we consider the laws of nature, basically the laws of nature can be considered to be omnipotent. They rule all of reality. So, guys, how's that sound so far?
Well, I'm still trying to figure out the omnipotence thing. This unlimited power. Now we've already established that it doesn't mean that God can make a rock so big you can't break it, or make 1 + 1 = 3. So to me, that seems like a limit to power.
Chandler, I agree. I think this unlimited power description in this wiki page is inaccurate. All powerful. Let's say sovereign. Are you familiar with the word sovereign?
Yes.
No, I mean I've looked at it before, but I forgot what it means. But I could.
Oh, actually, let's look it up right now. Let's go to it's a little hard to spell.
Yeah. Hey, I don't know how to
Sovereign.
spell either.
Okay, so sovereign, the first definition, is a supreme ruler, especially a monarch. But that applies to people. But basically, it's like supreme authority. So now here's the thing. So like the laws of nature are sovereign in that they determine what can and cannot happen in the universe. The laws of nature are omnipotent. They are all powerful. They determine what happens. In other words, like, nothing can happen unless the laws of nature allow it to happen. Can we agree on that definition of omnipotence, that it is basically the ability to rule over everything, that it basically determines what happens and what doesn't happen?
So basically, it's like the whatever the laws of nature say, that's what happens.
Exactly. This is the second fundamental attribute of God. God is everywhere. That's the first attribute. God is all powerful. That's the
Hmm.
second attribute. And again, we find that the laws of nature are all powerful, so that we can't really logically refute a God that is defined as all powerful, right? Because basically God is synonymous, in his attribute of omnipotence, is synonymous with the laws of nature, the fundamental forces and the basic, the governance of the universe.
And no one can escape causality.
Exactly. In other words, like we could even define God as causality, right? God, omnipotence, what causes everything? Causality causes everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so like now we've got two fundamental, definitions, descriptions of God that are irrefutable, because again, like the universe is everywhere and the laws of nature and causality govern everything. Okay,
Yes.
let's go to a next one. Now, this next one is more contentious. Actually, let's go with one that I think is inaccurate, and I think atheists correctly refute it. Okay, there's an attribute of God that is omnibenevolence, that God is like completely good. Okay, and like
That's funny.
you're right, and I have to agree with you guys. I can't, I don't believe God can be completely good.
You read that Bible, I guarantee you, if people have a with a somewhat conscious mind of reading that Bible without rose-colored glasses on, you will see that God is anything but good.
Exactly. Chandler, are we in agreement that so basically the atheists in this sense, they're right. God, it cannot be omnibenevolent, or is not omnibenevolent.
Well, here's my take on it, George, because whether somebody defines God as the Christian God that I was taught, or they define God as the universe, either way, omnibenevolence is impossible.
Okay, all right. So, and I agree with you. And as a matter of fact,
Yep.
here's in the Bible. If you go to
Well,
Isaiah,
actually, only time you're all loving is maybe when you're a newborn.
right, all right, but related to God, for example, if you go to Isaiah, hold on for a second. Isaiah 45:7, God Himself is saying, and I'm reading right from the Hebrew, the transliteration. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I the Lord do all these things. So essentially, in the Bible itself, it's saying that God.
What verse was that again?
That's Isaiah 45:7. All right, so
All right.
basically, so we're right now we're at like two definitions of God that are irrefutable, right? And one that's mistaken, right? So in other words, like, so there's all right. Now let's deal with one that's a bit more difficult than the ones we've been dealing with. God as all-knowing or omniscient. Um, Now, Chandler, what is the atheist refutation of that? Why do atheists say that God cannot be all knowing or omniscient?
Well, this is a very interesting one because what I commonly hear is, well, because omniscience is taken to mean that God knows everything, and that includes everything that will happen as well as what has happened in the past. And particularly, what's strange about it is that I don't really hear people say that God can't. Most people don't say give a reason why God can't know everything, but it's more like, well, if God knew everything, then why didn't He change it so that it wasn't that thing?
Exactly. Something I've been saying for years.
Well, and Chandler, I agree with you. The fundamental question in life, relative to human beings, because we're sentient beings, and relative to other, animals, is like, if God is all powerful, and God is like, I think we're assuming that God is intelligent, because like, um, governing the entire universe seems to be a very intelligent act. So, if God is all powerful, if God is intelligent also, why did he create suffering? Why did he create evil? Because evil, it just makes no sense. Is that kind of like
Another
what
thing
we're
that
kind
doesn't
of
make sense is diseases. Why do you create that?
right? All right, and the answer, I don't know. But here's the thing: like when we believe in free will, you know, the problem with that belief is that, well, the answer is, why is there suffering and evil in the world? Because human beings, because Adam and Eve sinned, because we brought it on ourselves with our free will, right? So, to the extent that we understand we don't have a free will, all of a sudden we recognize that it was God's doing. And so, like, again, and that's a lot harder. We don't have an answer. I don't have an answer for that. It makes no sense. But here's my defense of God being omniscient would be that, all right, to rule everything, to govern everything, I think you have to be aware of everything. Because how could you govern, through the laws of nature, something of which you're not aware? Guys, how does that sound?
Well, that's an interesting thought there.
Yeah, it is very interesting.
Yeah, because see, here's the thing about when we, I think part of the thing is when Christians talk about God, when I keep going back to that because that's how I was raised, when they think of God governing things, they think of like a ruler, a politician, a king or something, and that they're saying what happens, they're sovereign or whatever. But of course, those people doing that, they don't know everything, and there are plenty of things that they are not aware of.
Exactly. So the difference would be that, like, a person can't know everything, whereas the universe, I think, in a certain sense, would have to. So I agree with you, Chandler. I mean, it seems like the term atheist maybe should be better phrased acutheorist, in theist. In other words, like, that atheist means like without God, or that God doesn't exist, whereas an acutheist means that, like, that somebody who believes in the accurate description of God, which is not what Christians teach, which is not what Judaism and Islam and the major religions teach. But all right, but can we see, so in other words, like, this concept of the universe having to know everything to be able to govern everything, I'm not sure that atheists have a valid argument against. That they may claim that God is not a omniscient, but again, I haven't heard an argument that successfully refutes it. And if we kind of like base our conclusion on the universe needing to know everything to govern or rule everything, then that seems like a valid um, argument. So now we have three, attributes of fundamental attributes of God: um, omnipresence, omnipotence, and omniscience, that seem true, seem to make sense, and then one, omnibenevolence, that is, I think we can agree, completely inaccurate. In other words, if there's evil in the world, God has to be responsible for it. Okay, so, like, another definition from this page is that God is eternal. You see, it's right after divine simplicity, and we'll maybe deal with that. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but God, for example, if we define God as eternal, well, I mean, the universe is eternal as far as we know. The observed universe is, like, started 13.8 billion years ago, but physicists will tell you that that's just what we have knowledge of. That, it would seem, logic would seem to suggest that something caused the Big Bang, and something caused whatever caused the Big Bang. So then, can
Well,
we?
they're saying a white hole did it. It might be existence of a white hole out there, but yeah.
Interesting. WSD. That's the first time I hear that term, a white hole. So like, it's kind of like an opposite of a black
Yeah,
hole.
but it's still a theory. They're saying
Interesting.
that white holes are out. It might be existence of black holes. White holes are like supposed to be the opposite of a black hole.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay, but like,
Yeah.
can we agree that if we define God as eternal, that the universe is eternal? So that defining God as eternal is another fundamental attribute that is irrefutable.
Well, obviously, since the universe is all that exists, then clearly we have to say it's eternal because something always had to exist. That's the only way, especially with causality implies an infinite regress of causes.
All right, so we've got five fundamental attributes of God, one which is wrong,
Huh?
the omnibenevolence, and four which seem to be accurate. So, like, before we go further, because we've
Hey,
got
it's,
only about 8 minutes left, can you guys see how, like, how while the Judeo-Christian Islamic definition, conception of God is clearly wrong in a lot of ways, one being omnibenevolence, but like in other ways, for example, that God spoke to this person and, all this stuff, while a lot of that stuff is just myth, that when you define God according to these fundamental attributes, then God and the universe are synonymous. So like, it's really illogical to refute the existence of God.
Well, it's very interesting, and I see what you've done there, George, because one can take these attributes of God and apply them to the universe in a way that makes sense. However, when somebody asks me whether I believe in God or not, I usually will just tell them no, because I know that they mean the biblical God. They mean the Christian God, the one that sends you to hell and that
yeah.
for your sins and all that.
Oh, and by the way, there's a little off subject. I sent you a link about that white hole there if you
Oh,
want to look
okay,
at it.
thanks. All
But
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So here's the key thing, George. Um, like you're a pantheist, and so when you say, that God is synonymous with the universe, I get that, and yet I find that it's better just to use the word universe, rather than use the word God because we live in a world, that's full of Christians, Muslims, and Jews using God, which is clearly not the universe.
All right, but Chandler, but like, let's say we apply that reasoning. You're saying when a Christian says like they believe in God, you say no, I don't believe in God because you know what they mean, right? So like,
Hmm.
should we, if when we apply that to free will, when a free will believer says that they have a free will, should we be agreeing with them? Yes, according to what you mean, yes, we have a free will. Because if you apply that reasoning to the free will thing, that would seem to be what we should be doing. That we shouldn't be refuting the notion of free will.
Oh, wait. Hey, George, I think I get what you're saying here. In other words, what we're saying is that we are, that our response is matched to the definition of God that those other people are using, rather than fighting for what might be a real definition.
Exactly, and that's why
Hmm.
I started out with like that, like the standard atheist refutation of God is very similar to the standard compatibilist defense of free will. That it's basically based on inaccurate definitions.
Yeah, it's interesting because, see, um, it's difficult because, like, for example, with the free will thing, we go through that confusion, because you've got people using compatibilist definitions of free will, which are, meaningless and have nothing to do with what the debate's about. Um, and but I guess with the God thing, it's a little bit more tricky because you have it, like what the reason that I think of God as a man in the sky that's all pissed at the homosexuals or whatever. The reason that I think of that is because that is the sort of the way that the monotheistic and the polytheistic religions, so many religions that I've heard of all my life, they believe like, oh no, this natural disaster happened because the gods are angry. We must sacrifice a virgin or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and
That's
Chandler,
funny.
I completely agree with you. There's so much nonsense about like who God is and what he wants and what he doesn't want and all. So like, that's why, like almost
It
everybody on
seems
this app.
like if he's this powerful, what he doesn't want shouldn't exist.
Well, that's true. That's true. That's very true. And so then the question is, why does he make us kind of like want things the way they're not? I mean, and who can answer that? But Chandler, you're right. I mean, like, the
Had
standard
to cut down trying to
Judeo-Christian
finish session.
Islamic conception of God is so wrong. So atheists are very, very right in refuting that. But I think it's more about, you know, basically refuting mistaken, inaccurate conceptions of God and what God has done, rather than like refuting the notion of God itself. Because, like, I think, again, if atheists are trying to refute God, yet we can define God as being omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient, eternal, then, like, it's very difficult to refute that. So I think atheists, in terms of strategy, in terms of being able to kind of like lead the world from this completely, not completely mistaken, obviously, but like so vastly mistaken and harmful conception of God that we have now, to a God that's kind of like more beneficial to humankind. That I think that the approach would be not to refute God, but to simply say, listen, Christians, Jews, Muslims, it's not that God doesn't exist, is that you guys are so completely mistaken in your understanding of who and what God is.
Well, George, I think with this episode we've just offended all the other monotheists and possibly the polytheists out there. Because, like in religions, it's often blasphemous to say that you are God. But literally, if God is the universe, then you're God, I'm God, Will is God, everybody's God.
Hell, even the air you're breathing is God.
Yeah, so everything is God. So then what does it mean when, Christians try to say that an atheist is separated from God? I'm like, well, no, because if you're part of the universe, then you are part of the universe, so you are God. And
Exactly.
Yeah,
There's
hell,
no way
even you're
anyone could.
God.
Yeah,
I'm God.
there's no way anyone could
Cat's
ever
not.
be separated from God. The only thing we have to remember is, because we don't have a free will, it's like, fine, we may be God, we're just not the part of God that decides what happens.
if God is the universe, how can you sin? How can you do contrary to the will of the universe?
You're right. You can't. I mean, and as a
Can't.
matter of fact, Chandler, because we human beings don't have a free will, we never sin. It's impossible for us to sin. If we define sin as doing something that creates pain and suffering, then we'd have to conclude that God sins. God does some good things. That, in other words, God is not all good. God is both good and evil.
Right. So it's an interesting thing. We know that we didn't cause ourselves to do things, but that prior causes of infinite regression cause us to do what we do. So in other words, nobody's a dirty evil sinner and going to hell.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the values of our free will thing. So absolutely. All right, I know you have to end this, so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been a great episode. You've been listening to Chandler Klebs, George Ortega, and WSD Time, also known as Will. And we've been talking about, definitions of God, and George explaining his definition of God as the universe, which is very different from that of other monotheists that I've talked to. It's been an overall very interesting talk, and I hope that you've learned something from listening to this. Thank you and goodbye.